Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 41 of Business Therapy, a show about helping real professionals solve real business problems. Every week, we invite a guest onto the show to help guide them through the normal pains and setbacks of working through their career. Using a mindfulness-first approach, we help our guests find conscious solutions and help give them the tools to take on challenges that inevitably pop up during the ups and downs of business. I'm Sam Jawshak, and as always, I'm here with Jonathan Adams. Today on the show, we have Elisabeth Edelman. Did I say that name right? Edelman? Edelman. Sorry.
Yes. Sometimes. No, it's okay.
I've been hitting low on the last name guessing lately. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Why don't we start by telling us, the audience, a little bit more about yourself, your business, and how we can help you on the show today.
Great. So I run a PR firm based in Richmond, Virginia. We offer PR, communications consulting, and social media services for our clients. The firm's name is Golden Word. So we operate in the consumer and luxury lifestyle space. We serve clients across the country, so not just in Richmond or not just in Virginia. We do food and bev clients, design, hospitality, and fashion. So all of those verticals. We represent a number of spirits brands like restaurants, breweries, bed and breakfasts, interior designers, home decor brands. For me, I'm really passionate about working with brands that I love and I believe in. So I feel very fortunate to be working in that space of like, these are all really fun and exciting. So we have a team, a tight, talented team of 6 women. We're all based here in Richmond, but everyone has moved from major markets, New York, DC, Seattle. So that's awesome to be pulling in such great experience. And then to just give you like the Golden Word approach to PR is summed up by a phrase that I just trademarked, which is talk like a human. So there's a real genuine humility and empathy in our work, and it helps us cut through and help our clients tell stories in a way that connects.
Great.
So that's Golden Word. Do you want me to get into our problem?
Absolutely. Yeah. What can we do for you guys today?
Okay, great. So this is a little bit of a setup and some storytelling moments, but I think it adds some context to like what the big question is at the end. So I want to first give a little bit of history. I founded Golden Word 6 years ago in 2016. The first year was like easy and fun. I immediately had a full book of business for myself. And then every year since then, we have really wrestled with growth. So a founding tenet for Golden Word is we practice essentialism. So you guys know the book by Greg McKeown. I read that book and it really exploded my brain. I have loved everything that he's put into it and really try to apply it. So he, in the book, offers a 3-tier decision matrix, which I've used to help us determine like which clients we want to work with. And to sum it up easily, like if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. And so we really look to like the clients that are incoming, like how do we feel about them? So it's either a hell yes or a hell no. And in the first 3 years of Golden Word, we represented a lot of like more sexy startups. And these are totally like hell yeses to me. This is like great visibility, really kind people to work with, awesome stories. But then the downside is there's some volatility. And so that impacts me and my bottom line and the ability to do payroll on a regular basis. So they might run out of funding and suddenly let us go, even if we're killing it for them. So the lesson I learned from that is that we needed to balance off those sexy startups, as I like to call them, with some more stable clients. So it's a little bit of flash and then a little bit of just like more reliable revenue. Then the pandemic hit and we took obviously a big hit on the food and beverage side, the hospitality side, and very abruptly stopped working with a lot of them. So we took on a lot of work outside of our like typical verticals to survive. And at the same time, something that happened for me is I really honed my ability to win new business. I was already pretty good at it, but now I'm really good at it. And so I feel like now, so like cutting to today, right? And the setup for our problem is that we're on track to double in size this year over last. We like both in revenue and in staff. So we have more new business than I can hire for, which is a whole separate problem. But we've been like we're in communications, right? So I do what I think is a pretty good job of, advertising our services for particular verticals, right? Food and bev, design, hospitality, fashion. But I get inundated with new business requests that fall outside of those spaces. Some are really easy to say no to because we lack the expertise needed, the budgets don't align, or I'm just not interested, right? But others are intriguing because they have like a really friendly, talented team. They have a healthy budget. And then I have vision on how to execute the work. So, for example, like we've been approached by a real estate marketing firm, a fintech debt collections platform, an orthopedic practice. Like these are firmly outside of our traditional like expertise in how we're billing ourselves. But then I also have great vision on how to execute these, like how to help them, right? So my big question is, oh, well, wait, before I go there, the other thing is while we're being approached by all of these people, I'm also gotten really good at the winning new business. So I have a healthy pipeline coming in our areas of focus, but it's really hard. I don't know. I'm like trying to balance the fact that we need stable business in addition to like the more sexy startups that I get attracted to. So all to say, my big question is like, how do I decide which business to take? On one hand, I'm worried about diluting our positioning. Like, do we want to be a specialist versus a generalist? And there's great efficiency in operating within similar verticals. But on the other hand, particularly as we grow, diversifying our client base with more stable, well-funded clients, that's attractive. So then further, which I'll let you talk in a minute here, but like, I've also hired for our specialties. So my vision for a client outside of those verticals, sometimes the team doesn't share that or doesn't understand it. And then I feel like I'm training for that as well. But then these are also just like really good opportunities. So I'm just left with this, like, what do I do with this business question?
At the heart of it is the primary issue mitigating against volatility, or are there other issues at play?
That feels like it. Yes. I think the pandemic particularly like put me in more of a scarcity mindset of I'm worried like that. So it's kind of this, like the other side of the coin on the volatility piece of, I want to make sure that we're going to be okay and that I can provide for my team.
Mm-hmm. And did you apply the hell yes, hell no to the clients you took on after the startup phase?
Yes, I would say I stopped using it as much in the pandemic. That's when it just like fully went out the window. But recently I feel like my definition of a hell yes and hell no has potentially changed a little bit because I'm not just looking for that sexy story that we can sell from a client. I'm also thinking about like how I can provide for the team.
Well, I'll start by saying, first of all, congratulations. It sounds like having a healthy pipeline and all this growth is an amazing problem to have. But again, this is a very relatable, I think, topic where even if you were in a place of scarcity or under duress, mm-hmm. that even makes it harder in those times to decide what business will I take versus not. Because a lot of times, like I think you're articulating, what business you take on is it, I would almost describe it as what relationships you're going to have. It really can define a business, especially a smaller business or a startup. And again, when you have such a brand or an identity-based business, or at least something you're cultivating, that can be a really scary prospect because the people that you have relationships with, in effect, define you. So it's in some ways, it's kind of an articulation of an identity crisis where there's some fun things going on. There's lots of good business opportunity. But like you said, is there a where's the actual risk? Where's the actual tension? So I guess I'm just trying to summarize a little bit of what I heard about your situation, but I'd have a follow-up question on, because I hear a mix of, I'm excited about some of these opportunities, but then they don't match what I thought we wanted to be. If you could maybe kind of hone in a little bit more, where are you feeling the tension? Is the tension more like Jonathan was just asking on, like actually stabilizing the finances and hedging against volatility? Or is it more in your identity and how you'd be perceived if you started to branch out into other industries, or a combination of both, but maybe kind of help separate those dimensions?
Yeah, I think it is a combination in the sense that I don't know how much you guys know about the Enneagram, but I know that I'm an Enneagram 7. I'm the enthusiast, I'm the visionary. So I go into a new business conversation being like, okay, like we don't technically have capacity for anything right now, but then I talk to the person, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, we have to do this. This would be so great." And I get so swept up in that conversation, then turn around to the team and they're like, we don't know how to do this. You do, but we're the ones that have to execute it." So I think there's a little bit of I get not starstruck, but I get swept away in the conversation. And so I'm trying to find I'm trying to find the opportunities that are good for us, right? And I see more opportunities. So I also like growth has just been painful for us across the board. I never have the right amount of business and staff at the same time. So I'm always have like too much business and then I'm killing myself trying to get the work done. And, or I have too many people and I'm stressed out and I'm taking work that I don't really want to. So there's a myriad of opportunities and problems and layers to it, which is why I'm like, get so confused when I'm faced with this opportunity from a new client that I'm like, I don't know if I should take this because I almost am like looking at it from too many angles and perspectives. And so I can't clarify like which one should be prioritized.
I would, as an initial matter, because the first thing I'm always thinking about is what got you jazzed about your business, what got you excited to get up in the morning and do what you do, and has over time there been any misalignment with that? And especially whenever I hear about fear of anything, that's a killer to alignment, because what we do out of fear is a lot of should and never it's never positive. It's also not very inspiring to a team or to anybody to say we're doing this to protect against failure. Like that's that's you never want to do that. And you have so much obvious energy and excitement for what you do. So you definitely want to keep that. But you have so many layers, like you're saying, of incoming data that's conflicting with one another that, maybe I'll focus. Normally I think we would focus on the energy, and maybe Sam will still go there. But just to start giving some filter on how you can take a look at it. I heard something else there where when you're doing intake, you do the intake and then there's a reaction from the team. So there is the idea of there's, what keeps you excited and what's going to keep you wanting to do what you do, and then what's good for the company. And so when you think about the company, the fastest way to avoid the challenge of the disconnect there is accelerating the input to the decision making. So maybe someone else can be part of the intake process, or maybe you can define what your intake process is, and other people can go through it, and then they could see the challenge of saying no, or it's you don't want to have that tension of you're doing something and it's against the team, because you're trying to do something that's good for the team and good for the company. So participation can help mitigate that dramatically. But
I love that.
I want to ask about you had said, like, it almost seems like you have an answer to each problem. So like one of the problems you had was, and that's good. But one of the problems was that you don't know if you should go into a new vertical. And then you say, but I know I can kill it. So what's the problem?
Well, like I said, I'm nervous about diluting our identity as a company and our specialties. I also know that in PR, there's great efficiency to be going to the same editors with similar items or similar clients in the same vertical. And then we have to learn a whole new vertical if we sign on to this client. So I can't tell if I'm almost being like too optimistic about it, because I know it'll be great, but I also know it's going to be a lot of work. So I'm trying to find like the efficiencies and the moments that I just don't want to spread us too thin.
Well, and this is where starting to ask questions about how you're feeling about those decisions, because at the level and the size that you're at, a lot of the decision of what the business becomes is you navigating some of these personal feelings about, is it too much work or is it actually exciting? because you can create a logical argument to say that this is not going to give us economies of scale and this is not
Right.
efficient. But if you're personally excited by the learning process, or it's something that you know, your first gut is that I would actually like to learn this, I would like to put in the work, I would like to be able to help these people, you know, that is the company's character. So this is where a lot of the reflection is what you might have initially put out as the company's identity. If it doesn't match your personal, you know, where you are right now in the present about what excites you and what gives you energy, that's where you have this tension, this misalignment. Because, you know, I can imagine where if you said, I'm going to serve these verticals and become a specialist, but then you find it confusing, this feeling of excitement when you have other
Right.
opportunities. Nothing is really tying you to become that specialist. And you've got to be really, I guess you have to ask yourself honestly, is it, and this is where Jonathan was saying about the fear thing, do I want to take on these opportunities because I am legitimately excited about them?
Right.
Or is it because of some other reason that's coming up that makes you want to overextend yourself or put you in a position where you're going to have to do extra work, et cetera?
Yeah, I think often the voice in my head is like, to your point earlier, it's the should, like, you should take this, they're well funded. And so I do enjoy them to a point, but then I'm also like, I think that's more the overriding thought that's happening as opposed to the excitement. It's more like this would be like a good opportunity for the business, from a stability standpoint, from a revenue standpoint, as opposed to like, we would be super excited about this and know that we could do a good job with it.
Yeah. And even that, saying that out loud to me is a good reflection on if that's the case.
Yeah.
And I'm not as familiar with the hell yes, hell no framework you're using, but in terms of the framework of kind of being honest and reflecting on what do you actually want, if you're not excited about it and it's for other reasons, it's probably better to just hold the space so that things that you're really excited about can come in, or you're not accidentally getting overextended. And then you can think about the financial risk possibly as a second dimension to that. But it's kind of, you separate the problems into stages. But the first one is, where's the feeling coming from, and is the feeling authentic? Because I'd give one more piece that I always think about when you talk about growth, especially growth is only sustainable if you're getting energy from the activity.
Right.
If you think about it that way, you can't sustain growth in a company, especially a company your size, if you're taking on more activity for any other reason besides you and the team being excited about it and giving you more energy to work on it. Because if you think it's always going to be a net loss to you, no matter how you justify it rationally or with logic or with process or operating logic, because if it's giving you like sort of a net drain or fatigue, then that growth can't actually be real growth. It's going to be something you're always propping up until you or your team just burn out.
I'm definitely in the stage of its growth is a drain on us right now. So I don't know how to just or reconcile that with the fact that I do go into these calls and I get excited and then I turn around and I'm like, oh, I have to do this work. And I'm not full. Like, I'm coming from a place of like, it's been hard for the last like 5 years, you know, it's not even a pandemic thing, right? Just like growth across the board has been, for me, painful.
So is it because you get the excitement of having the vision of what could be done for the company and painting that broad vision, but then at the execution level, there's a lot of tension that results in?
Yeah, I think it just, I worry about, I know that we can do the work and we have done the work, right? But it's just a matter of having to manage all of the people involved and all the clients at the same time, which is an agency, you know, like that's what you're supposed to do. So it's funny that that's the issue. Yeah.
Right. But if we get rid of the supposed to and we get rid of the shoulds, what I'm trying to find out is, like, again, what gives you that excitement? What jazzes you? So if you're excited that you're, you know, it's validating to, obviously, when a client says, you know, somebody wants to work with you,
sure,
like you've had a lot of that validation, which is really nice. But if the excitement in those calls, and your real problem is you have the vision, you have the strategy, but at the execution level, it's you know, there could be either the tension of the team or just the skills that are needed, et cetera. then your real problem is that, like, you want to do more of the strategy and vision, for an example.
Yes. Yeah.
And less of, so then if that's your real problem, then can you think of ways where maybe you don't have to do all the execution? So in other words,
Right.
is there a market for creating that strategy? And, what jazzes you at the beginning? Because what I'm reflecting on is the first time you felt this way, where you had these kind of feelings, was when you had all those startups and you realized it was volatile. And so you said, in order to avoid volatility, the standard advice is diversify,
Right.
so, and that makes sense. But was that the right decision for you? Because if the startups were giving you all this energy, then the real question is there a way to work with startups and have volatility, or and mitigate the volatility? Or is there energy that exists within startups that can be replicated within more substantial entities? So, like, what is it characteristically? So what I would always recommend, when you feel the first tension, make sure that you're very, very clear about what the actual problem is, and what you would, if everything go the best way possible, what would that look like to you? Because the second we start assuming what it is that's exciting about what we're doing, we're
Right.
not be mindful about it, we might be protecting something we don't even want. So all I'm saying is, there is a way there are a lot of entities that work with mostly startups and mitigate against the volatility. So there are strategies for that. Obviously, it definitely will mitigate the volatility if you have more, stable entities, but maybe that's not right for you. So if you go back to that decision matrix at that moment, it seems like you're just scaling that kind of those challenges as you grow, because you're still not 100% if there's a way to have your cake and eat it too.
It's really interesting you say this, because I don't know, it's kind of like an obvious epiphany that I'm having, of that moment of all of that volatility with the startups started to get me thinking about how I felt like I was failing, right? That I wasn't providing for the team. And so I was like, okay, well, I should do this. I had a therapist who always, her expression was, you're shitting all over yourself. And so
I think we're going to steal that one.
Yeah, it's really good, right? Because you're like, dang it. Like it puts the should in the right place of, like, this is not a positive thing. And so for me, I don't think I realized that pivot in my mindset. I thought it was smart, and I thought it was a good, like, business strategy of, like, okay, if the startups are so volatile, then I should have more stable clients. And I didn't realize that I think that potentially maybe is a root cause of the, not burnout, but like the fatigue that I have from our growth in general, is because we're not, like, maybe we just not suck it up with the volatility, but just, like, to your point, have a better plan for mitigating it, and know that we're going to be in these turbulent waters, and just enjoy the process, like, lean into it more.
Well, even there was a should in there in terms of providing for the team. I should provide for the team.
Right.
And that's why I moved. But I bet if you put to the team, would you sooner have this, potential volatility with startups and do that work, or me bringing on larger clients? Which would you prefer? So like, in other words, again, there's always, you have to keep interrogating any should, as you don't want to keep be shooting all over yourself. So, so that, that right there, I bet, well, I don't want to assume what the team would say, but
sure,
if it caused energetic tension for you, it caused energetic tension everywhere. So, and
I was just going to piggyback on that, because I think it's critical, and we're not assuming how you talk to your team with this comment, but a lot of times leaders, they take on the unspoken burden of feeling like they have to create stability for their people. And oftentimes in these situations, like Jonathan was just mentioning, if you sit down with the team and say, hey, what gets us really excited is working in sort of a riskier space. What do you all feel about that? How would you feel if we had to tighten our belt, for a few months out of the year? Or how would you feel about this? What would you do? And having that as an open forum, especially with a small team, can be extremely powerful, because in a lot of case studies and a lot of situations that are similar, you end up making a lot of assumptions on what a stable, safe work environment is for your people. But especially in smaller companies where you do get to do really cool work, people are often willing to trade a lot of their safety and stability to kind of be a part of that sort of organization and have that high powered, high energy kind of fun environment. And a lot of times just opening up to conversation saying, what are we all comfortable with? And what would we do collectively, if we took a riskier angle? You might be surprised how much really authentic feedback you get from that kind of conversation.
That's interesting, because one of the reasons why I started Golden Word is I wanted to be working with clients that really energized us. And I was very mindful of, I don't want to sign us up for boring work that will pay well, but is just a slog. And we haven't gone that far, right? Like we haven't done that, but I could see how it's potentially like creeping in that direction if we're not mindful of it. So I think that's really interesting, just to invite the team more into the conversation, because I feel very responsible when a client comes out of nowhere and lets us go, because I feel like I've let the team down, which, like, obviously this is beyond my control to a degree, right? Like we can choose our clients, thankfully, but, I guess I worry that they're going to be worried. And I don't want that for them.
Right. Yeah. But nor can you own that for them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Own someone else's worry.
Yeah.
And if it makes you feel any better, from our experience in speaking with a lot of agencies over the years, this is kind of the people would rather agree to say, I'm going to eat ramen and get not paid for a quarter every year than to take on a boring agency work that kind of dulls our creativity and makes us want to basically kill ourselves. And we've heard that from a lot of agencies, where they eventually evolve into the point where you're talking about, where the death of the agency didn't come from they didn't have enough income or didn't have enough stability. They got locked up in a bunch of dreadful contracts that are just like really mundane things that nobody wanted to do when they started. And that is really the killer of a lot of creative teams.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, this is your show.
So, well, I was going to say, so what do I do in the moment when we have a client that comes to us that is outside of our verticals, but I get that moment of enthusiasm and vision for working with them? Like I've not signed us up for things that I am completely against, right? Or like, no, will be dreadfully boring. We haven't gotten that far. It's just more like, I do have these moments with the fintech company or the real estate marketing firm where I get really excited about the potential to work for them, even though I don't know, I just can't, how do I balance that versus like what the work will actually be like?
Mm-hmm. But for that's part of the question. What are you excited about? Are you excited about the execution and seeing it to fruition? Are you excited about that vision? Like what's going on for you at that moment?
Sure. That, I don't know if this is a phenomenon for you, but I feel like oftentimes I go into a meeting with people and I'm like, I don't know why they want to talk to me. I don't have any ideas on this front. And then like 20 minutes into the meeting, I have this click and I'm like, okay, here's the plan. I know exactly what to do. Here are my questions. Have you thought about this? And so I just get into this mode where I do get like, I have the clear vision on how to do the work for them. So yeah, I think I get really, I don't know, I can see it and I know how to do it.
Right. But again, is that enough for you? Because in other words, the question becomes like, can you still do that? Have those meetings, have those clicks without needing to be responsible for all of the execution? And would that give you the excitement? And by the way, you just answered the question about it. Do I specialize or generalize? So most of the times the problem people have is they just have this idea in their head of what that actually means. But when they break down the component parts, they realize that it's not what they thought. So to be in that meeting, could you imagine if a specialist was in that same meeting? Do you think you would have any less inspiration? Do you think what clicked for you would be any, more wrong or right than, than the other person? I could tell already. I'm confident that you'd be very confident in what you're espousing to them. So, you could compress time and not worry about that part, like
Okay.
the specialist.
Yeah.
But
And I'll give an answer, to your question about, does this happen to us? I can speak for me, at least, that this happens all the time in
Right.
terms of, we do a lot of process work at very high levels with organizations. And, and maybe this is more of a reflection of me personally, but there's not a single meeting I go to where I don't experience what you just said, which is like, I get 10 minutes in, I'm like, oh, I have a very strong opinion on what should or what could be done here. And a lot of that is because, I get excited personally about just being able to apply my knowledge to help people.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would answer, and this is kind of aligned with what Jonathan was saying, it's kind of, if you bring it down to a personal level and you think about it again as relationships, like when you take on a customer, you're building a relationship. It's the same thing personally. We could help probably a lot of people that you come across, but are you really helping them if you overextend yourself into a place where you can't help them effectively or with a level of excitement over time? And I think that's where it's so important to kind of know your boundaries. And especially if you have the vision, what I suggest to a lot of people in the situation you're describing is de-scope. And that's kind of what Jonathan, I think, is suggesting too, which is you can have a strategy offering if people respect you in the area, or they're already talking to you, but then find partners who can do execution, find partners who can, refer resources, or say like, I'm happy to stay on at the level that you feel you can stay excited at, and make that a strategic offering. There's really no limit to how you build a relationship, especially when you have your own, you control your scope of services. But I think it's making sure that initial excitement doesn't extend past what you actually can offer. And a lot of that is really a reflection. It's an internal facing reflection. It's really an internal kind of, you have to pause as especially a strong consultant, say, where am I actually, like, let's put my sales hat off and think, what do I actually want to do? What do I have the capability to do? And then be honest in that moment with the person who wants to build a relationship with you. Because I've had a lot of really great receptivity over the years of saying, like, I think I would know what to do, but I don't have the capability to do this right now. So I could advise you, or I could refer you, or we can maybe work in a different way. But it starts right there, like curtailing that excitement and being honest. And often that's pretty well received.
No, it's so we already do refer out a lot of the business that we get. Like we're turning away a lot of already. I think it's interesting to think through the ability to your point of like de-scoping, of potentially like putting ourselves in a position to offer more of the high level strategy. With PR, it's not one of those things where you can advise that someone go and do it on their own. So potentially like finding another agency to partner with, because I've always assumed we had to do it in-house, right? Like, again, I'm not going to turn around to a client of ours and be like, well, what you should do is pitch this story to national outlets. Like, that's not a capability that many people just have laying around in-house. But then, so partnering with another agency, because we have had trouble like finding people who have this skill set in this area.
Could you create the plan and then mentor somebody that's on the client's team?
Potentially, yes. Yeah.
I appreciate that in the moment, it's made of a million, it's not just the plan, it's the adaptability of the plan, in the face of what's going on. But I'm just trying to think of ways, because you have to think of intake as like a relay race. It doesn't matter how fast you can run in your part. If the rest of your team, has certain limitations, the overall output will be, no matter how brilliant your initial thoughts were, will be bad, for all parties involved. Then the question becomes, well, can I just make this into a 100-meter dash, and not make it a relay race, and then have the relay race be wherever level my company is at, that's why I keep coming back to that.
Well, and I'll add one thing, thinking before you respond, thinking about it the other way. So like Jonathan said, shortening the scope is one way to do it. And like you said, there's all this complexity around, well, could there be other partners that are qualified? Could we cultivate them? Could we offer training? There's really infinite solutions past the point where there's a boundary. But the important part of the conversation is setting your boundary, setting the boundary with you and your team. Like I was saying, personal boundaries, and the same with professional boundaries, which is, where do you know 100% that you could stay engaged and authentically be excited and give them that superior product. And beyond that line, and that line can change over time, as you evolve as a person or a company. So it's always worth interrogating, but it's always a good exercise to sit with yourself and the team and say, what is that line? Where do we know from experience that when we cross this line, we get fatigued, that becomes unmanageable, we don't like it? And really, it's kind of it's like when you go into sales calls, you really got to remind yourself, before the excitement comes on, what is my boundary? And knowing that it's going to be better for the client and for you. And that if you have an openness, you can have an openness outside the boundary to solution a million different things. Because I think there's a tons of ways to do that, but it's always hard to even contemplate the solutioning part if the boundary is not clear. So I think that's always the most critical thing to establish.
Yeah, absolutely. I traditionally have not been great with boundaries, so this is not the first time I've heard this one. But it's a new application of it, which is interesting to consider it here.
There have definitely been studies of the correlation between individuals' creativity and their underestimating of effort. So it's not, if you're innovative in the moment and have that, ability to see all the patterns and what's possible, it's not surprising if there is a certain amount of underestimating effort, and you should definitely be conscious of that.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah, and also this is where I don't know if we mentioned it explicitly again, but use your team as a backstop. I think Jonathan mentioned earlier about bringing them more into the vetting and the sales process. Even if they're pretty junior, I don't think it's ever too early to even use them as your accountability partner. A lot of how we talk, I think you can see the analogs between personal and business, because we think the nature of relationships and relationship building processes are very much similar when you talk about not just business. And a lot of times, even if you had a junior associate, even to an intern, if you said, here's what I'm feeling about this proposal that just came in, what do you think? That can be an effective checkpoint to make sure that your boundaries are at least articulated and clear, because in exchanging those thoughts with another person, even if they're just a sounding board, you can help reinforce your own ability to articulate your boundaries. And a lot of times that really illuminates a lot. So just making it part of your process to be communicating when you feel like you've run into problems in the past around these processes can really help clarify things for you.
Yeah, it's an interesting, that processing moment, just working that through with another partner here.
I've even had teams create the boundaries for me. So we all know what's going to happen here. So this is the limit of what you could say when you're doing intake. And beyond that, you need to check with whatever, so, even that's not an unusual constraint to have in any initial meeting. There's no reason why you have to commit to every, to what's going to happen absolutely in the future. So having that pause anyway is always helpful.
Yeah. What do I do in the instance where the team is we don't know, or there's not concrete feedback? Because I think that's happened often in the past. And so I can't tell if it's a deference to you decide, or if it's truly there's not an opinion.
My experience is when that comes from the question that's usually being asked. Okay. So if the question's if it seems like the question is I'm basically asking you to be responsible for the future of this company, but by my question in the decision you're making, there's a lot of, I don't know. But if you ask, do you enjoy working on this kind of work or this kind of work?
Yeah, that's a good
That's where you get a good answer. So you just have to make sure, are you asking them a fear-based question, or an exciting, the same question, but in an exciting way, because then that will get you a real answer. Because if you have unresolved fear in yourself, pushing it to someone else will always get an I don't know.
Yeah.
That's so helpful.
Yeah. And I have a strategy for that too, especially when junior folks are less responsive. You can always say, I always say, take people at face value. And when you're building honest culture, assume that they're telling the truth if they really have no opinion on a matter. But then the follow-up for me is usually, okay, well, in absence of any, but this is how I'm feeling right now, and this is the direction I would go. And then that kind of stimulates the conversation that Jonathan's talking about too, which is, so let's simulate what would happen if we follow my course of direction. And are we still excited? Because you will get them down to you will be doing this work, and this was what your day or your month will look like for the next quarter. And that usually can elicit some response from people, because unless they are just lying to you and they say oh yeah, that'd be exciting and that'd be great, and we'd love to do that, you're going to find out pretty quickly.
No, I love the reframing from the fear-based question, which, because I think I would ask, like, do you want to do this work? And that's not
Which is
the
so
right,
pregnant, which is pregnant with all the concerns that you probably mentioned, five
right.
times before.
Yeah.
So
And I think I'm being clear in that moment of just like, I want to know your opinion on your excitement level on it. But I think I could just be even more like drill down to it by positioning it differently.
yeah, or just invite them
Yeah.
into what you're afraid of. So in other words, have that out
Right.
loud conversation without an
Sure.
opinion. Just say, I'm afraid of this. I'm, worried about this result recorded. Like, so that at least there's a foundation that this is your concern. You're not necessarily saying they have to make an answer about it, but this is the
Yeah.
framework with under it, the context in which you're working. But that then at least gives meaning to the question afterwards. The other thing is, it sounds like we're probably giving advice about like de-scoping, generally, or getting smaller, but you could flip all this the same way to say, maybe you could grow. In other words, what are your assumptions of growth? What does that look like to you? So you've had bad experiences, which it sounds like the normal, growth of a company, experiences of skill sets
Sure.
and all of that. But again, you can flip it to, let's say you want it to grow. Let's say, that was the, because it was meeting an objective. You want to help as many companies as possible and whatever
Sure.
it is. Bring the team again into that. You might be surprised at all the dimensions of answers that potentially could come, or at least see where the true bottlenecks are in the execution. So I just didn't want to make it sound like we were
Yeah.
anti-growth.
No, well, it's just interesting because I feel like there's growth is lauded in the media, right? You talk about like so-and-so company hired 100 people and grew like 1,000% last year. And that's the thing that we're all seeking.
No, well,
Yeah.
If you're seeking to keep the energy that's going to sustain you,
Yes. Yeah.
it's possible that growth would be good and possible. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt there, but
no. I agree with you. I just think it's funny that this is what we celebrate in the culture of business. And I think it's admirable when you not break even, but you maintain year over year. Like that already is enough of a struggle. Sometimes it just depends. So we don't celebrate that. It's like, congrats, you didn't grow this year, but you kept it afloat,
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, I think it lends itself to a nice summary of some points that we were talking about in this episode, and also what I started to say earlier, which is we have to change our perception of what growth is, because like you said, we our perspective. And a lot of people, like you said, it's not really, we have to think of it as not really growth. I think every startup founder remembers their first dollar, and there's always going to be excitement when anyone offers you money, because in your mind, you're equating it to growth. But in reality, when we talk about good profit versus bad profit, or sustainable versus unsustainable growth, when you take on business that's bad for you and bad for your energy and bad for your team, it's not really growth. So when you say no to that, you have to kind of make the association in your mind that you're not saying no to growth. You're saying no to kind of a trap, really, which is what it is. And that excitement should kind of mature over time to discernment. And that's really what we're talking about. Because when you're asking questions about growth, the only growth that we consider true growth is from good profit, and that is sustainable. And it's the kind of work that you and your team would do over time. And if you feel like you can get a pipeline of that, then you can start growing people. I think when people fall into finding bad profit or taking on opportunities past their boundaries, then they start overextending, then a nightmare starts to begin. So the question was any of that revenue really growth to start? I don't think so, from my definition. So, and that's where I think, like you said, what are we actually lauding? Are we lauding every dollar, good or bad? Or are we lauding, people who can discern what is going to be sustainable growth? And I think that's the most important thing.
Great. I love that.
You also have, if there are more clients coming in than you can handle, you could also start thinking about your pricing, because it sounds like there's, a problem with demand. I'm sorry, with supply.
Right. Yes.
I'm always doing is pricing, and, definitely something worth thinking about. But you yourself could see how, let's say, last episode was about like preparing for a recession. So traditional advice for preparing for a recession is diversification. But you saw you could diversify and grow and totally fail. Like, in other words, you can destroy
Right.
the whole company, because if everyone is unhappy, or you're not delivering, what you're supposed to do for every client. And so the worst feeling is failing on a should. So it should grow. Everybody lauds growth. And when you fail on that, that's the worst pain. At least if you're going to fail on what you want to do,
Yeah.
so that's, and it's much less likely that you'll fail anyway. But
I feel like there's a pull quote in there for sure.
Well,
no, that's so like strong and inspirational, and really just like takes my perspective and hones it. So I really appreciate that.
yeah, and I guess that's the start of my question. I was going to ask, how are you feeling? I know we've been talking about a lot of heavy
Yeah.
stuff for the session. Where are you at right now? Do you feel lighter? Do you have any last minute questions or comments for us?
No, I feel reinvigorated because I do go into these calls with clients, and I think I'm probably shitting all over myself. Like, I want to perform well for them, and I am truly excited, but I don't know how to translate it to the business, and I don't know which ones should pass, which ones should pass muster. So this is really helpful to reframe the conversation and bring more of the team into it. I think will also be helpful. Reset our boundaries, because we've essentially, like, because of the volatility of the startups and the pandemic, we reset our boundaries. Like, we pulled them back a little bit. And I think now we can potentially afford to be a little bit more stringent with them, in the hopes of chasing that good profit and not the work that's going to drain us energetically.
And or looking at ways to monetize the parts that give you energy, as opposed to assuming that everything's a package deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
That's the whole nature of what you just described about scaling, which is if you can actually reset your boundary and everything within the boundary is good profit, good energy, and like it's everyone excited, you're trying to scale that. Anything that you creep in there that you also try to scale is just gonna like basically toxify your operating model over time, and then you're growing like a bad plant, basically, which is not what you want. So
yeah.
Well, good.
No,
well,
that's super clarifying. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm glad you're feeling invigorated. It was awesome having you on the show. So thank you so much for coming. And if anyone who's listening, again, we love your questions. We love your comments. And if you want to come on Business Therapy, please reach out. But other than that, Elisabeth, thank you so much for your time. And we will talk to everyone next week.
And Elisabeth, I could see why your clients, why you're well liked and appreciated by your clients.
Thank you.
I can imagine how great you are at your job.
I love my job. And so I'm grateful to have these tools to make me continue to love it. So thank you.
Great.
Excellent.
Thanks, everyone.